It's not just you. If you're an importer, whether it's a pallet a year or 1,000 containers a month, right now international freight is difficult. You're looking at a perfect storm created by COVID, empty containers, government regulation, shifting consumption habits, all which are coming together to make it very, very difficult to plan and price international freight movements. Let's take a look at what the causes are before we start looking at how you can contend with it. Right now, in order to ship a 40-foot container from Shenzhen to the United States, costs 2.5 times more than it did at the same time last year. Somewhere between going from $1,500 up to $3,870 or $75. It's really, really expensive. The same shift is also happening on exports from China to Europe. Over the past month alone, the price to ship a 40-foot container climbed from $2,200 to $3,700. Why is this happening? COVID, and a couple of other reasons. The first is that the past year has created a lot of trade imbalances, and that meant that 40-foot containers and 20-foot containers have been piling up in silos around the world. Suddenly, in order to ship all of the demand that's coming from changing consumption habits, right, we're not using the barbers and service providers nearly as much as we used to. Instead, we're all buying goods. We're buying it online and we're ordering it to our homes. What that means is that there's much more demand than people anticipated, and that's changed even more during peak season right now in order to build up for holiday season. So there weren't enough containers distributed around the world, and suddenly when everybody was trying to import from Southeast Asia, that container imbalance reared its head and made prices start to climb. Ocean liners are trying to contend with that by shipping empty containers faster back to Southeast Asia instead of accepting exports, which is also grabbing the attention of some regulators. Both Chinese and US government regulators in September started to intervene because prices had started to climb way higher than most people anticipated. So since then, prices flattened out, but they haven't really, because while the core ocean line prices have not changed recently, if you start to look at the actual numbers, additional surcharges for equipment and for peak season surcharges, or even the cost to get onto a specific ocean liner shipment, has increased significantly. So it's very, very expensive. And beyond the price, you're going to pay in transit time as well. Ships are waiting at ports much more than they used to. Terminals are under a ton of stress, both because of the health regulations and the conditions under which their employees can work, but also because of the sheer volume of imports, together with the congestion from the empty containers that are getting shipped back out. What that means is backlogs and easily waiting 5 to 7 days just to get your containers out from a port and onwards for the rest of their journey. It also creates problems down funnel as well. We're seeing customers waiting 5 to 10 days just to get their delivery appointment at Amazon. The air side is no different. In the very beginning of the year, prices shot through the roof, and it makes sense. About 50% of air cargo moves in passenger airplanes, and suddenly no passengers were flying. So prices shot up by 400% between March and April, dropped a little bit, but have since spiked back up for peak season import season. It's really, really difficult, and of course, vaccine shipments, which are really, really important and we're all very grateful for, are not necessarily helping the high cost of air freight. One more thing that gets thrown into the mix is that the health regulations and people being scared about COVID, rightfully so, has led to some ports or airports being shut down. For example, LAX was shut down briefly, as was an airport in China not so long ago. So that's what's happening in the freight market, and the truth is it's going to get worse before it gets better. Historically, every single February, usually in the beginning of February, Chinese New Year means that the factories stop working for a while. It gets harder to ship goods out, and there's a rush in order to get all of the imports out from Southeast Asia to replenish inventory that was depleted during the holiday season rush. So there's going to be more demand, and right now where most experts are sitting, they're anticipating these high prices and congestion continuing until at least February. What does this do for you? Let's take a look at that.
Thanks, Eitan, for giving insight on what's going on in the freight market. So you know you're getting hit with unprecedentedly high freight costs for both FCL, full container loads, and LCL, less than container loads, though LCL rates aren't as high as FCL rates. But what are some other implications? So beyond the sky-high pricing, because of all the delays and congestion and shortage of containers at origin ports, whichever logistics provider you selected might have to switch carriers, which could affect the cost, making your shipment more expensive and even have different transit times. On top of that, your shipments may even get rolled or rerouted, and some are even being held at the origin port. So what can you do to control for this volatility? 1. Communicate and coordinate with your supplier in advance to make sure your goods are ready early and that you have all required documents ready, like export licenses, commercial invoices, and any other required documentation. This is especially important now to plan ahead for Chinese New Year, when most manufacturing and shipping comes to a halt. This year, the national holiday runs from February 11th to the 17th. So you want to get your goods moving with enough time before then because it causes extra delays and backlogs. 2, try to avoid changing the commercial invoice, which can affect the amount you need to pay for customs duties and taxes, which can cause delays once your goods arrive at U.S. Customs. 3, FCL rates are very high right now. It might be worth comparing with LCL rates. 4, similar to coordinating advance your supplier or factory, try to book your shipment a bit further in advance to be prepared for these delays. But always keep in mind the validity rate for the quote you selected. Your goods need to be gated in before that date. But again, remember, because of the current volatility and lack of capacity, some providers might not be able to find space before the validity date. So there is a chance that your quote can change. It's important to keep that in mind that can happen, but it's also important to know that if that does happen, you can always cancel and rebook your shipment if you don't agree with the change. Lastly, stay on top of the freight market. There's a lot of unpredictability right now, so being informed and educated is key. You can sign up for our weekly FBX email and be sure to read our monthly newsletter. But at the end of the day, it's a really tough time. There's a lot going on, and it might not change till well after the Chinese New Year. So be sure to stay informed.